So it's 1:30 right now. So let's go on. Again, this is the darkest part of the book of Romans, talking about God's wrath and his judgment and the sin of humanity. So that's what we're going to be taking a look at. And guys, I'm going to try and get out of the section as quick as possible because I don't like it. And that's Paul's intent, that we would be disgusted with what we are seeing because we see it maybe in our own lives. And so God's wrath against the pagan Gentiles is what we're going to be seeing. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and all unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. And I'm going to show you some verses that have to do with the wrath of God so that you can see that it is a biblical principle. And we're going to see that the wrath of God is mentioned both in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. Not many people want to talk about the wrath of God. I certainly don't, but it is an attribute of God that is important and consistent with who he is. And so just as God is kind and merciful and gentle and loving and forgiving, he is also a wrathful God. And wrathful not against his own obedient children, but he is wrathful, as the verse says here, against all ungodliness. And so, guys, sin needs to be judged. Sin needs to be taken care of. And we need to do business with God. And we need to renounce these things and make sure that they're not in our lives, because he wants us to be holy. He wants us to be perfect, just like he is perfect. So look at what Jeremiah 30, verse 23 says. Who would like to read this? Yes, thank you.
Behold the storm of the Lord, wrath is gone forth, a whirling tempest. It will burst upon the head of the wicked.
Wrath has gone forth, a whirling tempest. It will burst upon the head of the wicked. And so Jeremiah speaks against God's wrath. Jeremiah was prophesying against unrepentant Judah at this time. And so, did wrath come upon Judah? Came in the form of the Babylonians. And it's interesting, it was Habakkuk who said, but God, they're worse than we are. The Babylonians are worse than we are. How could you use them to judge us? But that was God's instrument of judgment against wicked Judah. And so yes, God had to chastise his own people, and he used it through this judgment. Nahum 1, 2. Oh, I should put it up on the screen, I'm sorry. Seth, would you like to read that one?
Sure. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries and keeps wrath for his enemies.
Okay, vengeance and wrath, they're part of the character of God, according to Nahum. We also have in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 31. Raleigh, what does that say?
It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Mm-hmm. And so one of the reasons that we're studying about God's wrath is we need to fear him. We need to have a reverent fear of him. We need to respect him and listen to him and be obedient to him. Doug, would you like to read a little bit from Revelation, please? Revelation 19, verse 15.
For his mouth comes a sharp two-edged sword, and ready to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of Almighty God.
The fury of the wrath of Almighty God. So you can see from both Old and New Testaments, Jeremiah, Nahum, Romans chapter 1, and Hebrews and Revelation, that God is a wrathful God. And so it's correct to let people know that there is judgment that's coming. Most of the book of Revelation has to do with God's wrath. Starting in chapter 6 and on to 19, God's pouring out his wrath upon this ungodly world through the bowl judgments, through the trumpet judgments, through the vial judgments, and he'll demonstrate that through earthquakes, through wars, through demonic activity, through famine, through fires, through all kinds of natural and supernatural means, showing his power against the ungodly. Okay, J.I. Packer said, what did J.I. Packer say?
God's wrath in the Bible is never the capricious, self-indulgent, irritable, morally ignoble thing that human anger so often is. It is instead a right and necessary reaction to objective moral evil.
And so God is not like John Bonner. John Bonner is irritable. He's more self-indulgent, capricious. I get angry easy, especially, well, never mind. But God is, he's justified in his wrath and his anger. And, yes, sir.
So, even some people in my family, I've had this kind of, not a debate, but a discussion with,
Mhm.
as far as, so the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament is the same God.
Mhm.
And God would be like, okay, these Philistines, go wipe them all
Yeah.
out. Don't
Yep.
leave one alive.
Mhm.
And then Jesus would come and be like, okay, if someone slaps you, turn the other cheek. And I think that's where people get confused. And so especially with like my view of the military, like I believe that God uses them
Mhm.
for his glory. And so it's always difficult for me though to explain to someone, okay, well then how's the God of the Old Testament and Jesus the same God
Mhm.
if one preaches destroy them all and one preaches forgive them all,
Mhm.
you know? It's something I struggle with sometimes to think about,
Yeah.
you know,
Mhm.
when I think about Christ.
Mhm.
But when it says in Revelation he's coming back with a sword, it's
That's
like,
right. That's
okay.
right. And his sword is dipped in blood, and he has he's coming back on a white horse to battle
Mhm.
and to judge. And so we even see Jesus being God as being wrathful as well. So we can't say that it's out of character for him. Mhm. You made me think of something. I forgot what I was going to say.
Did you say with the cheek?
Turn the other cheek.
Mhm.
Someone to slap you. Present your
Oh,
argument
you
to
know
them.
what he
Yeah.
says with which cheek, which side?
I don't remember.
You
I
slept.
think that depends on the context too, like, you know.
No, because
There's a time for self-defense, but if it's
Mhm.
for the sake of the Lord, like, there's a time when it's best just to take it and
Yeah.
allow
Mhm.
Yeah.
injury.
That's true.
it says in English the right side of your cheek.
Well, I don't know if it matters necessarily. It's just
It's
saying.
just
I think the point is like if someone hurts you, just have them like hurt you again.
Mhm.
Well, it's,
Yeah.
it's,
Oh,
to not,
it's
it's
a
to not take
translation
vengeance
mistake.
upon them,
Yeah.
almost. It's
Like
like,
if your
don't.
enemy takes your jacket, give them your
Yeah.
shirt, give them your coat as well.
Yeah.
But I think Carmen was going to get to something, huh? Having to
Yeah,
do
I
with the right
tried.
side. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So it does say that if they slap you on the right side, give them on the left side, right? Were you going to say something about
Yeah, I tried to say something. It's about I just learned it through a Jew. She's a professor, and she explains some things where we have translation mistakes, a
Mhm.
lot of translation mistakes, and she explains where Yeshua is coming from the side of this Jew. He was so. She explained, and it was very interesting because when Yeshua said, "Hold on your cheek, or right cheek," you can't really slap somebody in the right cheek. It's impossible. It would be this. You know what I mean? So this was more like this. So this was not like somebody hurts you. It
It
was.
was like disrespecting someone.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
okay. It was like they were
It's,
Nazi slapping you versus forehead
it's
slapping
more,
you.
yeah.
Okay.
I thought it was very interesting because you just said, and I heard it 2, 3. I need to check it again. But many things we have just a lot of translation
Yeah.
mistakes.
That is
We
interesting.
have a wrong interpretation.
Mhm.
Take it to a different, and it's more from a
Mm.
perspective of
culture?
I'll have to look into
yeah,
that. That's
thank you,
interesting.
of culture.
Like putting burning coals upon someone's head. We'll talk about that in a few chapters. What does that mean exactly? Burning coals on someone's head? Doesn't it sound terrible? But what it is, it actually means that in this culture, they were using those carbones, the coals, in order to light fires in somebody's home, in order to provide heat in an oven and things like that. And so people would go around blessing people with these they're coals. So it doesn't mean, it means just the opposite, and I think that you're onto something there.
Yeah.
Faith, you were going to say something.
So, are we as believers exempt from God's wrath?
Yes,
Okay.
we are.
Okay.
Yes, because if we go back, he says it's against unrighteousness. Mm-hmm. And so we are not targets of God's wrath. Now that we have come to the Lord, now that we have repented of our sins, now that we're walking with Him, His wrath is not against us. And that's a beautiful truth that we want to drive home. Yes, ma'am?
Is God's wrath being poured out today, or is it just kind of in the future it's going to be when He's...
Maybe in some ways, but it'll be in an increasingly greater way, especially as we get closer and closer to the Great Tribulation period and during the Great Tribulation period. The world will taste the fury of God's wrath at that point.
And like, what's the difference between like God's wrath and like disasters and things that come from like man or stuff like that?
I think He uses earthquakes and fires and tornadoes and hurricanes and natural means as part of His judgment as well. Because we see them again during the time of the Great Tribulation. He'll use those things, and that could be what He's using today. You know, it seems like in Israel, for example, whenever Israel gives up a portion of land, trading land for peace, some disaster falls upon the country. And God is saying it's not your country in order for you to give it away to other people. This is my land, and it's not right for you to do that. And I know a prime minister, Ariel Sharon of Israel. He gave away Gaza, and immediately following that, he went to a many years long coma. And I'm wondering if that isn't God's wrath upon a decision that He made. That God doesn't want Israel's leaders to give Israel's land away. It's His land, and they have no right to do that. Maybe that's an example of how He would do that. It seems like so many times when the United States makes a decision, that's when a huge hurricane comes through, or a snowstorm, or something. And I'm always thinking, does God use these things to pour out His wrath upon wrong decisions that are being made? A lot of times we get ourselves into trouble because we make wrong decisions, and we have to suffer the consequences. I think that's a small way of the Lord showing us, yeah, you need to respect me and fear me. But as believers, we know that from what the Bible says, that God has not created us unto wrath. That's not why He created us, and He doesn't want to pour out His wrath upon anyone. That's why He sent His Son, so that people would believe in what Jesus did for them, and they would be saved from the wrath to come. There are many Christians who believe that the Christians will go through the 7 years of tribulation. And why not? Because there are Christians all over the world who are going through different types of bad things that are happening. And if they're going through persecution, why not us? But the thing is I see that God saves His own from wrath. And so I'm not expecting to go through the Great Tribulation period. It wasn't made for me, it was made for the ungodly. And a neat shadow of that we see in the Old Testament we see it in the book of Daniel. Remember when Nebuchadnezzar was requiring everyone to bow down to the statue that he made and to sing to it and to worship it? Well, there were 3 guys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that did not bow down to the statue. So they were cast into the fiery furnace, and they weren't hurt in the fiery furnace. They weren't burned. They came out alive. While they were still in Nebuchadnezzar looked and he said, "Don't I see 4 men in there?" And there was one that looks like the Son of God, they said. And so I believe that Jesus was in there with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. But the question was, where was Daniel at? Because we know he didn't bow down, but he was not in the fiery furnace. And we see kind of a type there. We see the type of the church in Daniel, who was not near the fiery furnace. We see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who are representatives of the nation of Israel, who did go through the fiery furnace, but they were saved in the end. And then we see those who were pushed into the fiery furnace because they were requiring this, and that's an example of the world. I see it again someplace else. Do you want to hear about it?
Yes.
Yeah. I see it in Noah's story. Noah went through the flood. There were those who were destroyed in the flood, but there was somebody who was taken out before the flood came, and his name was Enoch. And so Enoch was spared. He didn't go through the flood. He was taken out, kind of raptured out of the story. Noah and his family went through the ark. Went through the flood in the ark. They were protected by the Lord when they went through those years of tribulation during the flood. And then there was the world, the ungodly, who perished in the natural disaster, the flood that came upon the earth. So I see a parallel happening continuing through Scripture where the saints are taken away. And I think that's what's going to happen before the Great Tribulation period. We're going to be raptured out just like Enoch was, but the Jews are going to go through the Great Tribulation, but they'll be spared, and then the ungodly will perish during that time in God's wrath and judgment. So I see this repeated over and over, and God promises us, He tells us that I have not made you for wrath. You have not been created for wrath. So I'm not expecting to go through the Great Tribulation. Okay? Okay, so verse 18, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness. You know, this is kind of cool too. Listen to this. Remember when Lot was living with Abraham, and Lot, it was decided that they needed to separate from each other, and Lot set his eyes towards the land of Sodom, and he pitched his tent there, and then pretty soon he was living inside of the city, and then pretty soon he was sitting at the gates of the city, which means that he became a judge inside of the city, one of the city officials. And the Lord revealed to Abraham that He was going to destroy the region of Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham interceded for Lot. And he said, what if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Would you still destroy the city for 50 righteous? And God said, no, if there are 50 righteous or godly people inside of the city, I will not destroy it. And Abraham said, what about for 40? And God said, not even for 40. And Abraham said, now don't get mad at me, but if there's 30 righteous people in the city, would you still destroy the city? And God said, no. How about 25? How about 20? 15? 10? And God said, no, I wouldn't destroy it for 10 righteous people that are in the city. So God refused to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if there were 10 living there. Now listen to this. Lot and his wife and his 3 daughters were visited and told, you need to get out of the city. Unless you get out of the city, I won't destroy it. And so even for one righteous person, God was willing to spare the city. He was waiting for Lot to be removed of the city before He would destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. So if there were just one righteous person on planet Earth, I think God would hold back His wrath for that one person. Now think about Lot. He's the guy who wanted to give his virgin daughters to the homosexuals who lived inside of the city. We never see Lot worshiping or praying or, in a right relationship with God at all. But in the New Testament, we have him described as righteous Lot. And so even his life was spared. Just that one person's life was spared because God was holding back his wrath upon for the ungodly. So those are reasons why I don't think he's going to manifest his wrath upon us. Did I answer your question? Okay. Very good. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the yes, sir.
Sorry, one second. Can you guys turn your phones off? Like I had internet access, and then I don't know if someone turned their phone on or what, but kicked me off the internet. If anyone has it on. It should be connected.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry.
No problem. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And Carmen, this is the answer to your question earlier today. What about the one who lives in the jungle? What about the one who is so remote that he has not heard? How about an indigenous tribe that they've never had an opportunity to hear from the gospel? What Paul is saying here is, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, God's invisible attributes, his loving kindness, his patience, even his wrath, are clearly seen in nature, being understood by the things that are made, God's creation, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. So the most remote person that lives on planet Earth, God is able to reveal himself to those people. Sometimes he uses missionaries. Sometimes he uses angels. Sometimes he uses dreams and visions. But it's interesting, in the book of Ecclesiastes, it says that God has put eternity in the heart of man. And so the most remotest person who's never had a missionary visit them, God will judge them according to what they know, what he has revealed to them, where they're at. Mm-hmm. Yes?
And is there like a verse for that? Like, what's it again? I can't remember.
Ecclesiastes?
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah. I don't remember the exact verse, but I'll find it for you. I can show it to you. But I have a story for you guys. I have lots of stories. Would you like to hear one? Yeah. So there was a Inca emperor who lived in Peru. I live in Peru. And his name was Pachacutec. And Pachacutec would worship the sun god Inti. And that was the god that all the Inca worshipped at that time. Well, Pachacutec was sitting on top of a mountain. He was worshiping the sun. And a cloud came in between Inti and him. And as he thought about it, he thought, it's really strange that a mere cloud could come in between my God and me and diminish his brilliance. And he started to wonder, my God, is he really God? Or in nature is he being diminished by just a cloud? And so he thought about it some more, and he realized that Inti always came up in the east and he always sat in the west. And that his God was very limited because he was on the set track every day. And then he thought about it some more, that Inti would come up in the east, sat in the west, and then during the nighttime he would have to run back to the east in order to be up in time to to come up again. And so that his God was, he never rested, he was limited on the set track, and that a mere cloud could diminish his brilliance. And he started to think about it. He was thinking, I think I'm worshiping the wrong God. Isn't that cool?
Amazing.
His people would worship the creation, but Pachacutec was thinking, I think I'm worshiping the wrong God. And he went back to the elders of the tribe, and he asked them, did we ever worship any other gods beside Inti? And they confirmed to him that yes, much before they used to worship a god. His name was Viracocha. And Viracocha was known as the sinless, perfect God and the creator of Inti. And he asked them, how come we don't worship Viracocha anymore? And the reason is because he is so good and we are so bad that we can't even come into his presence because he's perfect. And so that's why we worship Inti today. But Viracocha was the one who created Inti. And so Pachacutec decided to worship Viracocha instead of Inti. And there are writings that he left behind, beautiful songs of praise and adoration to God the Creator. They say that those songs parallel the Psalms in the Bible. It's cool, huh? And it was very difficult for him, being the emperor over the entire Inca Empire, to convince people now that all of those human sacrifices that they gave to Inti to worship him, that they were wrong and they were mistaken. How many young lives of virgin daughters were sacrificed to this pagan god that didn't even exist? And so it was very, very difficult for him to convince people that they should be worshiping Viracocha. And what's even more tragic is it was about that time when the Spaniards came in the conquest of the Americas. They came and they didn't take the time to learn about this new revelation that Pachacutec had. What they could have done is they could have preached about Jesus Christ, the son of Viracocha, the creator God. But instead of doing that, they just killed the Inca and didn't preach Christianity to them at all. They went for the gold and the power and the land. So we need to be sensitive culturally to the revelation that the Lord is giving to people. Maybe they don't have the names right, maybe they don't have biblical knowledge, but we can start exactly where they're at and begin to teach about Jesus to them. And this is what Paul did. He was very sensitive to do that. Again, on Mars Hill, Acts chapter 17, he wanted to teach them about the unknown God. And that's a great story there that I might tell you guys later too. But this is an example how God can reveal himself to the most pagan, the most distant people that there are, because he has put eternity in their hearts and he reveals himself through nature to them. Now, God can do that, but he chooses to use people. He wants to send us. He wants to send apostles, missionaries to preach the gospel. And we're going to see here in chapter 10, and next week we're going to have a visitor who's going to teach a segment of my class, chapter 10. Trent Douglas is his name, and he's doing missions all over the world, so I think you guys are going to enjoy him as a guest speaker for my class. Okay?
He's
So,
my pastor. Sorry, I just had to throw that out.
he's your pastor
Yeah.
from Yorba Linda. So, Trent will be here. Did you know that before?
Yeah, he told me.
Oh, he cheated, huh? So let's read this verse again. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, just through nature, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And so God may have revealed himself to them through nature, but they insisted on worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. They knew him, but they did not glorify him. And listen to this, they were unthankful. So many times I pray and I ask the Lord and I have a need and ask him to do a miracle. And you know what? He does it. And I walk away with the money or whatever it is that I was praying for. And I don't even take a moment to go back and thank him for those good things that he's done in my life. I don't know if you guys do that, but sometimes I'm very ungrateful to the Lord for the good things that he has done for us. Many times I'll have pizza sitting before me and I'll just shove it down my throat and not even thank him for his provision for me. Not even think twice. And he's given us so much more. He's giving us eternity. He's given us unending life. He's given us freedom from bondage of sin. He's given us so much, and sometimes we don't take the time to thank Him for those things. Would you guys like to thank Him right now? Maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe just take 5 minutes to pray and just to thank Him for His good provision in our lives in all things.